for Wolf. Stevenson runs 55 minutes, 3:55 to Lakeshore Drive. The Ryan 38 minutes, 95th to downtown. I-57, 27 minutes, I-80 to the Merge, Bishop 426. Southbound Lakeshore Drive is heavy, Foster to North Avenue. That's traffic. I'm Jim Calamonte on AM 560, The Answer.
Chicago's Morning Answer continues next. Your official Chicagoland weather forecast on this National Blueberry Pancake Day. The 1-hour heating and air conditioning weather center, Steve Williams.
Some flurries this morning, otherwise cloudy. Watch out for some freezing drizzle, too. High today, 34. Clouds and flurries tonight, low 27. For tomorrow and Thursday, cloudy. High tomorrow, 34. Thursday's high, 35. I'm Steve Williams on AM 560, The Answer.
32 at O'Hare. Next news, 8:30. Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan and Amy continues next on AM 560, The Answer.
This hourly segment is brought to you by Papa Nicholas Coffee. Papa Nicholas Coffee, a family tradition since 1897.
This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Rules changes, it has advanced. Emergency request necessitated by a injunction by a federal appellate court. This is the specific guideline in question was to expand the pool of people considered likely to become a public charge under U.S. immigration law. If an immigrant makes use of a public assistance program such as housing assistance, food stamps, or Medicaid, or an immigration officer estimates he or she might in the future, the person could be denied a green card or barred from the U.S. altogether. This would stay at the appellate court level, and the Supreme Court removed that stay and allows the administration to move forward with that policy change. Something important, though, in addition to the removal of that stay in all but every state but
California?
Illinois.
Oh, Illinois.
It
come
does
on.
not apply in Illinois because Illinois, it was enjoined in a different case in Illinois.
So that injunction in Illinois remains in effect.
Correct.
Okay.
But for the other 49 states, it's full speed ahead. But Gorsuch decided to issue a concurring opinion, sending a message to lower court judges around the country. Because what you've had is more stays, more injunctions issued against this administration than any presidential administration in history. Gorsuch writing, today the court rightly grants a stay, allowing the government to pursue, for now, its policy everywhere save Illinois. But in light of all that's come before, it would be delusional to think that one stay suffices to remedy the problem. The real problem here is the increasingly common practice of trial courts ordering relief that transcends the cases before them. Whether framed as injunctions of nationwide, universal, or cosmic scope, these orders share the same basic flaw. They direct how the defendant must act toward persons who are not parties to the case. This was not a statement by even the majority in the case necessarily of support for the particular policy. It was a statement as to the proper power and exercise of it, where it is and is not being exercised properly. Yes, at the Supreme Court level, but in part only because their hand is forced by overreaches at the lower court level. It's just an important holding, and it speaks to the jurisprudence of a true originalist like Gorsuch, and I would also suggest probably a couple others, but most notably, of course, Clarence Thomas. And Clarence Thomas is the subject of a new documentary that I want to get to in just a moment. But just to set that up, talking about Clarence Thomas and his tenure on the court, his import in the history of American jurisprudence now. There's a great interview that he did with his wife a couple of years ago, and we played it on the show.
Yeah.
But forgetting his political and judicial philosophy for a minute, the miracle of Clarence Thomas's life, the miracle that has been his life, he spoke about it.
You know, it's always interesting to me when people say, well, I don't believe in miracle. Well, I have no other explanations. It doesn't add up. You can say it's luck. You can say it's good fortune. You could say, I prefer to just say, well, it's just divine providence. Because there is just no explanation that a house burns down, that results in my brother and me going to live with my mother in this tenement. Well, then she can't really handle two little boys and working for $10 to $15 a week. So she takes us to our grandparents. And then so you wind up being raised by two of the greatest people you would ever know. Tell me that's not miraculous. They then take you to a Catholic school where you have nuns who devote their lives to little black kids in the inner city of Savannah. So then that is another miracle. You then wind up going into the seminary, and that's another totally different experience. Now, how do you explain all of that? I mean, how does it all sort of make sense if you look at it as you go through it? In retrospect, it makes sense. But to me, looking at it retrospectively also suggests to me that it is certainly providential that this happened.
And if you haven't read his autobiography, I would encourage you to pick it up and check it out. My Godfather's Son is the title of Clarence Thomas's autobiography. The title of the new documentary about Clarence Thomas is Created Equal, Clarence Thomas in his own words. Michael Pack is is a publisher, documentary film producer, and nonprofit executive who directed this new documentary, Created Equal, and he joins us now. Michael, thanks for being with us. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me on.
So what was the inspiration for you to pursue this documentary on Thomas?
Well, we had heard from mutual friends that Justice Thomas was getting tired of having his story told by people who didn't agree with him or even people who hated him, and he was getting tired of the lies and half-truths. And so we met with him, and it didn't take long. I had not read his memoir that you just referred to, or I didn't know that much about him except the confirmation battle. But once you know his story, as you just said, and as that clip even indicates, it's such a great story. I really felt it needed to be told. And as the clip you showed also illustrates, he's a great storyteller himself. Lots of people don't know that. They think of him as quiet and taciturn, which is so far from the truth. So we came up with the idea. Originally, it was going to be a documentary interviewing 10 or 15 people across the political spectrum, different stages of his life. But turns out he's the best teller of his own tale. So we were lucky in that we were able to conduct over 30 hours of interviews with Justice Thomas and his wife, Ginny, and only them. And Justice Thomas looks right at the camera and tells the story directly to the audience in his own words from the very beginning, from his birth all the way up, as he describes in that clip too, from his birth in poverty in the segregated South all the way up to the Supreme Court. A great and classic American story.
Was there anything off the table? Or could you ask him anything about Anita Hill, about that Senate Judiciary Committee meeting?
We did. We asked him a lot about that. I mean, there was nothing off the table except that Justice Thomas, like almost every justice, refuses to comment on either cases that might be coming before the court or current political events. But nothing in his own life was off the table, and he talked at length about it. I mean, our film gives you his experience of these things. So he talks about what it was like to go through that hearing. As does his wife Ginny, and he mentions in the clip you showed the divine providence aspect of his life, and he does talk about how by the people don't remember how long the hearing was, but there was the first part of the hearing, and then Anita Hill's testimony was leaked, and then there's a second part of the hearing, and they had felt really nothing left by the time the Anita Hill allegations came out, and they felt that second part was like spiritual warfare, and they relied deeply on their faith to get them through. And both Justice Thomas and Ginny talk about what that was like. I mean, it's a very powerful, moving thing, for everyone, whether you agree with him or not. I agree with what you said earlier, that it's a great story. It's just a great American story and a very moving one. Whatever your political beliefs.
Yeah, and the other thing about Thomas, because he is not one to speak a lot in public, particularly during court proceedings, So people don't have a good handle on him, and he's been sort of caricatured as brooding, and he's still angry about what happened during the confirmation hearing. And if you go back to that Ginny Thomas interview of her husband from a couple of years ago that I referenced, that nothing could be further from the truth on that caricature of the type of person he is, personality-wise too. That whatever hurt and animosity he felt has long since dissipated, and that he's actually quite a very fun-loving and jovial guy who doesn't spend a whole lot of time living his lives in the minds of others.
Well, that is very true. I mean, I think one of the most inspiring things about his story is his resilience in the face of deep opposition, and his unwillingness to define himself as a victim. If he grew up in the segregated South, he experienced dire poverty in Savannah, but he chooses to think of his life as blessed.
Yeah.
And we can all look at things that way. I think it's very inspiring. And one of the reasons we made the film was to shatter these myths, like the one you just said about Justice Thomas. And, the truth is very different. And his story goes on past the little bit that he told. I mean, there's his rejection of the church, at his grandfather kicking him out, at his going through a period where he was a black radical at Holy Cross, supporting the Panthers and Angela Davis and Malcolm X, and then finally coming back to his faith and back to the values of his grandfather and the nuns, and then becoming politically conservative through experiencing the failures of the left. A powerful story. A lot of it, I mean, there is divine providence, but a lot of it has to do with choices and that Justice Thomas made, and his ability to think his way back from the left back to his core values.
Yeah.
I mean, it's an amazing story.
A spiritual and intellectual journey, no question.
Spiritual and intellectual, yes, very true.
And the relationship between Clarence and Ginny as well. There's long been rumors about him wanting to retire because what he really likes to do is fire up the RV, and the two of them go blue highways around the country.
Yeah.
Well, that's right. But Justice Thomas said to us that, the Supreme Court is a job for life, and that's the way he thinks about it. So I hope that that's true. He's, by the standards, even the standards of the presidential race, he's not old. he's I think 71, 72. He could be there, another 15 years, and I hope he does stay.
What about the tangled questions that were put to him by then Senate Judiciary Committee Chairman Joe Biden? What did he say about his interaction with him?
Well, I mean, we have a clip. That's the first part of the hearing. Before Anita Hill's allegations were leaked, Joe Biden asked him these very intricate, Byzantine, tricky questions about natural law. And as Justice Thomas says, he saw it as just a ruse to get him to talk about abortion. I mean, that was the driving force of the driving motive of the anti-Thomas forces. And, you could see Joe Biden getting caught up in the intricacies of natural law. It goes back to Aristotle, he deals with Aquinas, and it's not really something he's in command of. And you see the exchange between them. It's sort of a comic moment in the film, but it has that serious purpose. And you can see, Justice Thomas says, you just have to, you see them asking questions, they don't understand, and you just have to sort of sit there and nod.
Imagine Joe Biden being out of his depth. Who could think of such a moment?
Yeah, who could?
So, Michael, tell us where people can access this documentary. Give us all the particulars.
Well, it's going to be in movie theaters starting this Friday, it'll be. You can find out exactly where by going to our website, justicethomasmovie.com, and watch our trailer. And if it's not in the part of the world that you're in, there's a way to sign up to get. If there are 30 of you, we can do a showing where you are. But it will be in Chicago. It's at a movie theater called the River East 21.
I know it well. Yes.
Yes,
right,
you could get there blind.
In Streeterville, right down the block from me. Yeah, so now that's a big theater, so everybody knows that in Chicago.
Right down the block, no excuse to not going.
Oh,
but I appeal to your listeners to go, even if it's 20 or 30 minutes away, Chicago being a big place. there's a feeling, I think, among people who love Clarence Thomas and maybe were sympathetic to his views, more conservatives, don't bother to go to the movies. They just don't show up and go, whereas the left does show up and go. The parallel movie to ours, RBG, about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, did a huge box office.
Yeah.
People who loved her show up. They buy T-shirts. They buy tickets. They go. I myself went to it. I'm happy to learn about Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I think people can go, whatever their politics, to the Thomas movie. But surely those in your listeners who are sympathetic, they have to go, buy tickets, and show up, rather than just complain that there are no movies like this. I appeal to them to do it.
Absolutely.
And especially this opening weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
Absolutely. Excellent point. You're right, and you're right to issue that challenge. JusticeThomasMovie.com. I'm going to wrangle everybody, all 15 conservatives I know in Chicago, and take them.
Well, River East.
Yes.
It's the River East 21. Where and it's AMC loves this movie, and it is an AMC theater, and I'm happy to support AMC. But
yeah, it's great.
Buy tickets.
Yeah, it's great you're getting that kind of distribution. That's a great theater to host it. AMC River East in Chicago. JusticeThomasMovie.com to find out other locations it'll be playing. Go get tickets and see it this opening weekend. Opens Friday.
Bring your family, especially young people, and bring people who do not necessarily agree with you. I think it's a good basis for a discussion.
All right, very good. He is Michael Pack. He is a publisher, documentary film producer, nonprofit executive, and he directs this new documentary on Clarence Thomas, Created Equal. Clarence Thomas, in his own words, JusticeThomasMovie.com. Premieres this Friday, Chicago at AMC River East, and go to the website for other locations. Michael Pack, thanks so much for joining us. Good luck with the film.
Thank you.
He joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
You've made the switch, and it feels so good. You've switched to Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
If credit card debt has you down, nonprofit Trinity Debt Management can help.
Trinity will consolidate your accounts into one easy-to-manage monthly payment, put a stop to late fees, and drastically reduce your interest. You'll pay thousands